Wheel may the keel row, the keel row, the keel row.
Hiya, this is Geordie Frasers. I thought this time I'd have a look at the origins of Geordie and Northumbrian, see where they come from, and also look at the related subject of place names, because place names and dialect are closely related in the northeast of England.
Anglo-Saxon.
Now, I've heard it said that the nearest you'll get to the speech of the Anglo-Saxons is Geordie. Now, I don't know whether that's true, it's probably stretching the truth a little bit, but certainly a lot of words that we use in the northeast of England are Anglo-Saxon in origin, or in particular from the Northumbrian version of Anglo-Saxon, from the Northumbrian language of many years ago.
When we were Welsh.
Now, before we were Anglo-Saxon, once upon a time we were all Welsh boyo. So the original Britons spoke a sort of a northern form of Welsh, Cumbric, a northern Cumbric language, and they were replaced, well, their language anyway was replaced by the Anglo-Saxons. Now, have the Welsh speakers left any traces in our place names or dialect? Well, not a lot really. If you go into Yorkshire, there is a very famous hill called Pen-y-Ghent. Here we go, Pen-y-Ghent. Pen-y-Ghent. Now, that doesn't look Welsh. I don't know what doesn't, but that is actually a remnant of the days when the people of the Pennines, at least, spoke a form of Welsh. If you go into Northumberland, just across the Durham border into Northumberland, there's a place called Wallace, which Wallace even, the surname, actually means Welsh. And it may well be a reference to Britons that once lived in the area. Place names like Wallington in Northumberland or Walworth near Darlington are also references to the Britons. Wellis, it actually means foreigner. The Anglo-Saxons used the phrase to mean foreigner, Welsh.
Yan, Dan, Tethera.
The counting systems. If you go to the Dales, Teesdale, Weardale, the Dales of Cumbria, there's this counting system that they use for counting the sheep, and it goes something like this: Yan, Tan, Tether, Mether, Mimph, Hither, Lither, Dan, Verdick. And that actually has a Welsh origin, and that may be another trace back to the days of the Britons who spoke Welsh. Now, the Welsh weren't wiped out. The Britons weren't wiped out in the north of England. They were absorbed by this Anglo-Saxon culture. The Anglo-Saxon language became the dominant language, and most of the place names in England are actually Anglo-Saxon, and in parts of lowland Scotland too.
Angeln, the Angle.
Now, who are these Anglo-Saxons? I'll give you a clue. They're the Angles and the Saxons. Well, the Angles came from an area called Angeln, which is in the Jutland Peninsula, Jutland being that bit that juts out from Germany, forming the peninsula of Denmark. The very southern part of it today is part of Germany, and in that area of Jutland you will find a district called Angeln.
Now, the Angles, who came from Angeln, they gave their name to England, and they also gave their name to the kingdom of East Anglia, and Northumbria was an Angle kingdom too. Now, strangely, Angeln is on the east coast of Jutland, so it's not an obvious base for an invasion of Britain. So how did the Angles end up in Northumbria and England? Well, we don't actually know for sure. Keels. So there are hazy references by Welsh chroniclers such as Gildas to Anglo-Saxons being given land in Britain in return for military protection. They state that the Anglo-Saxons arrived in warships called keels, and keel thus became the first English word ever to be written down. Now, this was in the late Roman period, either slightly before or after the Romans had abandoned Britain, leaving the Romanised Britons to fend for themselves. However this may have happened, the Anglo-Saxons ultimately took over, so that their language and place names came to dominate most of Britain south of the Firth of Forth. It wasn't a complete transplantation, however, as genetic studies have shown that we are still largely descended from the Britons and earlier peoples who have lived in our lands for thousands of years. Now, it was not unusual for the Romans to pay tribes to uproot from their homelands and settle in new provinces for the defence of an unstable realm. These people were known as foederati, and it was a common practice in the Roman Empire. So this may be the reason that the Angles and the Saxons arrived in Britain. But in truth, we don't actually know.
it's fundamental to who we are as English, or who the English are, so it's something we don't really understand. Anyway, in the northeast of England, there are a lot of Anglian elements, Anglo-Saxon elements in the speech, the dialect.
80% Anglo-Saxon?
I've heard it said that about 80% of Geordie words, 80%, I've heard a more precise figure, 82% of words in the Geordie dialect are Anglo-Saxon in origin. Now, it's probably something thereabouts. You might say, well, it's an English dialect after all. What would you expect? But if you look at English itself, everyday English, only about 30% of words used in English are Anglo-Saxon in origin. In fact, if you've got one of those big, if you're really into language, and you've got one of those big, massive, multi-volume Oxford English dictionaries, that run to about 20 volumes or something like that, only about 1% of the words in that dictionary are Anglo-Saxon in origin. We've got influences from Greek and Latin and French and so on. And Scandinavian as well. So we've got all these massive, influences from all over Europe and the world. There's Indian influences as well. So, but Geordie is about 80% Anglo-Saxon. So maybe it is the nearest you'll get to Anglo-Saxon. But if you actually go back and you read a bit of Old English, which is the technical term for Anglo-Saxon, you'd probably struggle. It's an alien language compared to English today. Anglo-Saxon words used in everyday English: man, child, brother, sister, eat, drink, sleep, fight, love, in, on, at, far and but, the nuts and bolts basically of our language.
Gan on, lan yourself.
But what about Geordie? Well, I'm hoping to learn you something. I am sorry, young man, I think you'll find that the correct term is to teach, not to learn. Well, you see, in Anglo-Saxon, learn could mean to teach as well as to learn. So we've got this word learn. If you're learning someone, like in Scott Dobson, you remember there was a book called Learn Yourself Geordie, Teach Yourself Geordie, and that was written, I think, in the 60s by a bloke from Blyth called Scott Dobson, a bit of a Geordie classic. But he's actually using the word learn there in its old sense. So I needn't ax you what I mean by learn. Actually, axion, the Anglo-Saxon word for ask.
You ken that Scots has Northumbrian roots.
Now, in the northeast, for stream, as in Scotland, we use the word burn. It's another Anglo-Saxon word. It means stream, and it's used in Scotland too. Another important fact is a lot of the English that's spoken in Scots is also strongly influenced by Anglo-Saxon, and in particular by the Northumbrian dialect or Northumbrian language of Anglo-Saxon. It had a profound influence on Scots, and that's the form of English spoken in Scotland, not the Gaelic, not the Celtic language, which is spoken mostly in the islands out in the northwest of Scotland. We're talking the Scots language, influenced by Northumbrian.
You gant the hoppins the neat? Why, aye.
You gant the hoppins. Hoppin is an old word for a fair, where people went to have a bit of a dance and merriment, that kind of thing. And you might be gan to the hoppins, gan. The word gan literally means go, and it's an Anglo-Saxon word. So there you go, very basic Anglo-Saxon words that we use in the northeast. Let me think. Then we've also got deed, coo, clute, hoose, rang, strang, and lang. The pronunciation's dead, cow, clout, or cloth, rang, strong, and long. Deed, coo, clute, hoose, rang, strang, and lang. Hoose for house. So you've got all these pronunciations that we use in the northeast of England, which are actually Anglo-Saxon, the Anglo-Saxon pronunciations.
Sexy Saxons.
So we've looked at the Angles. What about the Saxons? Well, the Saxons, they came from Lower Saxony, and they settled mostly in the south of England. They formed the kingdoms of Wessex, Essex, Sussex and Middlesex, the West Saxons, the East Saxons, the South Saxons and the Middle Saxons, which were all kingdoms at one time. Some of those are now counties. The Saxons were named from a tool or a small sword, like a knife-like weapon, also used as a tool, which the women and the men used to wear about their waist, called the siacs, and that's how we get these sexy names in the south of England, from the Saxons. And then we have the Jutes. Now, where the Jutes came from is a little bit of a matter of debate. It's often said that they're from Jutland. What we do know from the Venerable Bede is that they settled in Kent, and they settled on the Isle of Wight and on the Hampshire coast opposite the Isle of Wight. Now, another interesting group of people are the Frisians. The Frisians are interesting for a number of respects because they're not mentioned by Bede as one of the tribes that invaded Britain, but it's known that the Frisians did settle in Britain along with the Saxons and the Jutes and the Angles. The other interesting thing about the Frisians is that they actually served in the Roman army in Roman times. A number of them did. For example, Housesteads was manned by a Frisian auxiliary in the 3rd and the 4th century. At least the auxiliary was named from the Frisians and quite probably raised there as well. The Frisians are also interesting because their language still survives, and it's the most closely related language other than Scots to the English language. And it has quite a lot of similarities with words that are used in Geordie and words that were used in the Old English of the Anglo-Saxons too. For example, Gian, which was originally in the Old Frisian gan, as it was in Anglo-Saxon, means go. And then you've got words like hald for hold, or hush for house, or ut for out, and efter for after, and deed for dead, and ni for no, and ald for old, lang for long, steen for stone, and wife for wife, well actually for woman, as it used in Geordie, ald wife, an old woman. And then you've got bairn for a child, and similar to Scots, they say ken for know, for knowing, for knowledge. Now, some of these words, in truth, are also found in other Germanic languages, in some of the Scandinavian languages and in Dutch and so on. If you've ever been to Holland or Belgium, you may have seen these signs. In fact, just to say, you get off the plane and a Geordie gets off the plane, he says, "Uitgang," that must be where you're gone out. So you got these little similarities of words and language features that Geordie shares with these continental languages. And again, if Scots is a language, by the way, then Northumbrian must also be a language, of which Geordie, of course, is a variation, because Scots, to a large extent, developed from Northumbrian. So the closest language to English, Scots, followed by Frisian. Well, Northumbrian must be in there somewhere as well. Now, I should also explain, I mentioned that Frisian is the only surviving language of the language of the Jutes and the Angles and the Saxons, because the language of the Saxons and the Angles, those areas, the Lower Saxony area and the area now called Angel, they now speak German, and the German language developed in the south of Germany, the High German, and it replaced the languages spoken in those areas. And the Jutes, if they did originate from Jutland, that's an area that now speaks, northern Jutland, that's an area that now speaks Danish. So Frisian is the only one that survives of those languages. It's different to the Old Frisian, just in the same way as English is different to the Old English of the Anglo-Saxons. It's developed in its own way, but it still has that connection with the Old English and even English itself of today. So it's interesting to compare it, which you can't do with the areas of Lower Saxony and Angeln. You can't make that comparison because those areas now speak German today. You can't the tune pet. We also talk about, in Newcastle, they talk about the town. Well, I don't know if you've noticed that a lot of place names end in tun. Now, tun originally meant enclosed settlements, like a farm or a village. So places like Stockton and Norton and Wrighton, these are all places that have that element tun, meaning enclosure, settlement. And that's the origin of the word town. The word town developed from that. And in the Old Anglo-Saxon, tun was pronounced tun.
Why, I didn't know any of that, like. Let's watch the next one.